This infamous dashcam video showing Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke shooting teenager Laquan McDonald set off a chain reaction. The outrage over this footage would lead to the biggest civil rights investigation in the history of the U.S. Justice Department.
16 shots in the cover-up.
In late 2015, the massive protests that followed the video's release led to political upheaval in Chicago. In December, Mayor Rahm Emanuel fired Police Superintendent Gary McCarthy. That same month, the Justice Department launched its investigation, interviewing nearly 400 police officers and city employees in a series of community forums. The department heard an earful from the public, too.
The community needs to pick who the superintendent is, or it's just going to go back to business as usual.
The outrage from minority communities revealed a major breakdown of trust in Chicago police.
The kind of alienation and breakdown of police community relations that is so pronounced right now and results in more violent crime and the inability of the police to close cases of people in the neighborhoods most affected.
Investigative reporter Jamie Kelvin, who first uncovered Laquan McDonald's autopsy report, says he welcomed the Justice Department investigation.
By addressing those underlying issues that have been allowed to kind of metastasize over the years, that we get back to a place where every citizen of Chicago is guaranteed a level of personal safety.
In January of this year, then Attorney General Loretta Lynch, with Mayor Emanuel at her side, announced a damning conclusion to the 13-month DOJ investigation.
The Department of Justice has concluded that there is reasonable cause to believe that the Chicago Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of use of excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution.
But exactly 1 week later, a new president was sworn in. During his campaign, Donald Trump had frequently cited Chicago as an example of American cities plagued by crime.
In Chicago, more than 4,000 people were shot last year alone, and the murder rate so far this year has been even higher. This is not acceptable in our society.
On Twitter, the new president threatened to, quote, send in the feds if Chicago doesn't fix the horrible carnage going on, end quote. Chicago Police Board President Lori Lightfoot questions what exactly the president meant.
If sending in the feds means we are going to fully staff up the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the ATF to be able partners to help CPD, to help the state's attorney's office, to help the state police and other actors in fighting the scourge of violence, I'm all for it.
But President Trump's pick for Attorney General, Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, quickly indicated he would not embrace any federal reforms involving police violence. He criticized consent decrees with 14 local police departments. In April, he ordered a sweeping review of Justice Department investigations of police in Chicago and many other cities. In a memo, Sessions made the new policy clear, quote, it's not the responsibility of the federal government to manage non-federal law enforcement agencies, end quote.
It's regrettable. There were things that the Justice Department would have brought to the reform process that are really important. Not least is the kind of hammer of federal oversight, of a federal judge overseeing the reform process and making sure that commitments made by the city to reform are in fact realized. That's a significant loss.
Despite the dramatic changes in Washington, Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson insists he will press ahead with reform.
We don't control what the White House or the Department of Justice does in terms of the consent decree. But what I can tell you is this, regardless of their position on it, what they do or do not do, CPD and the city of Chicago, we're moving forward with our reform efforts regardless of where they stand.
Those reforms announced in March include 5 major categories: improving manpower and supervision, more community policing, better officer training, revised guidance on use of force, and more transparency and accountability. But all that comes at a cost, and federal money for reform is now in jeopardy.
There are tens of millions of dollars over time that are going to need to be spent on the police reforms that we're talking about, from training, from standing up an early intervention system, to re-engaging the public.
Just as Chicago seeks to find its police reform bearings under the new Trump administration, it also has to contend with a police union which is negotiating a new contract and feels emboldened by a meeting and comments from Attorney General Sessions, where he has echoed the president's get tough anti-consent decree approach to fighting crime. We reached out to new FOP President Kevin Graham for comment, but he was unavailable. Despite changes in the union representing Chicago police and the anti-police reform rhetoric from the Trump administration, the head of Chicago's police board says cops on the beat must be part of the process.
They will recognize that they need to be a partner in reforms, and that reform extends to some of the provisions within the FOP contract and the supervisors' contracts that are problematic. But reform has to happen. We can't take steps back.
For In the Loop, I'm Darrell Denard reporting.